Good afternoon again. Good afternoon. I have a special treat for you. We have members of our wonderful Georgia Tech Chamber Choir who would like to give us a special performance in honor of our award recipients.
Lift every voice and sing till the heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let the rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast light our mind, let us sing to the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, O God, where we met Thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee. Shadow beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
From the time they were 19, this year's recipients became leaders in that struggle for racial equality. Charlayne Hunter-Gault and the late Hamilton Holmes showed tremendous courage when they enrolled as the first African-American students at the University of Georgia. They both were denied admission to UGA in 1959, so they kept applying every quarter. On January 6, 1961, Judge Boodle, whose son, I don't know if he's still with us, he was with us this morning. And thank you, by the way, for sharing some of the stories this morning. He ruled that they were qualified for admission. They enrolled at the university 3 days later. They both overcame much overt and covert persecution, including riots and being suspended, quote, for their own safety, quote. They didn't stay gone long, and they persevered. During my first week as Tech's president this last September, I had the privilege of participating in a symposium with our own trailblazers at Georgia Tech, the first African-American students, Fort Greene, Ralph Long, Lawrence Williams, and the first African-American graduate, Ron Yancey, whose cousin is with us as well today. Fort Greene just passed away last month, and we now have sculptures of these trailblazers on our campus to remind us of the journey they and we went through. The sad truth is that they were rarely given the opportunity to walk together, even though that's how the statues represent them. At that symposium, they shared that they were told not to be seen together on campus because it might be interpreted that they were going to cause trouble. The stories they shared during our diversity symposium were difficult, but they were very important for us to hear. And we must remember their journey, your journey, Charlayne, and ensure that future generations never forget the courage of those who came before them to create a more just and inclusive world. After earning their bachelor's degrees at UGA, Charlayne Hunter-Gault and Hamilton Holmes went on to have very successful careers. Charlayne as a journalist and as an author, and Hamilton in medicine. Charlayne has worked as a reporter for the New York Times, the New Yorker, PBS, NewsHour, where she currently contributes to the Race Matters series looking at solutions to racism. She's also worked as an African correspondent for National Public Radio and South Africa Bureau Chief for CNN. Included in her very impressive awards for journalism are 2 National News and Documentary Emmy Awards and 2 George Foster Peabody Awards. She has been recognized by numerous organizations, including the National Urban Coalition and the American Women in Radio and Television. She was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists and received the Washington Press Club Foundation's 2015 Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2015, she was inducted into the Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame. After graduating from the University of Georgia, Hamilton Holmes was the first African-American student admitted to the Emory University School of Medicine. Yes, integrating one school was not enough for him. He had to do 2, where he earned his medical degree in 1967. He completed his residency at Emory after serving in the military. Dr. Holmes became a distinguished orthopedic surgeon and community leader in Atlanta. He worked as chief of orthopedics in the Atlanta Veterans Administration Hospital in private medicine and served as chairman of orthopedic surgery at Grady Memorial Hospital. When Dr. Holmes passed away in 1995, he left a lasting legacy in the city. He became a role model for countless others to follow in his footsteps. They're daily reminders of his impact throughout the city. Several Atlanta landmarks are named in his honor, including Hamilton Holmes Elementary School, Hamilton Holmes Drive, and the Holmes MARTA Station. As an author and journalist, Charlayne Hunter-Gault has given us several quotable quotes. I particularly like the simple wisdom of this one. I think that the thing that we learned back in the day of the civil rights movement is that you have to keep on keeping on. Inspired by the lives of our honorees today, may we all keep on keeping on in our courage and our conviction. Please join me as we recognize Charlayne Hunter-Gault and posthumously Dr. Hamilton Holmes, accepting on behalf of Dr. Holmes is his son, Hamilton E. Holmes, Jr. Please join me. Charlayne will share some remarks right now.
Earlier, I thought I was going to say, I'm too overcome, so let's just re-roll the videotape from this morning. And I'm still thinking that. What an amazing panel, and what an amazing introduction to this day. So in the first instance, I want to thank every member of that panel for sharing your wisdom and your encouragement. And of course, Alexis, You did have to say it was 40 years ago that we met, but that's okay. But I don't guess we're going to re-roll the videotape. So I want to hasten to say something obvious to this group of people. I do not stand alone. In point of fact, I think everyone in this room would know Mary Frances Early is sitting there, and so many people who have also blazed trails. I stand on the shoulders of giants, starting with those who have been honored with this award in the past, almost all of whom I'm honored to know, and whose journeys have inspired my own journey toward the mountaintop. And I want to especially single out John Lewis today, who, in the face of a challenging illness, is as inspirational as when he endured some of the harshest blows of anyone in the civil rights movement. In fact, the harshest blows he received on his journey to the mountaintop, where he was working for freedom and justice for all of us. And I am sure that each one of you in this room will wish him well, however long the next phase of his journey will be. I also stand on the shoulders of Hamilton Holmes, whose all too short life remains alive as an example to all of us to pursue the dreams and not to let anybody turn us around. And I'm happy always to see his wonderful, supportive family and my family. Ron, my supportive husband of 48 years, plus 3 practice, but I won't go into that. And our 2 children, Susan and Chuma, who had a lot to put up with, but they never complained, well, almost never, and were always supportive of my every endeavor, even when it meant having long absences when I was on the road. That goes for my brothers, Chuck and his wife, Teresa, and my brother, Franklin, who got lost on the way here, but he eventually turned up. I'm glad you made it. And a multitude of friends all over the world, including those who went to jail without bail to end the lie of separate but equal here in Atlanta. My friend Tom Johnson, who, as you heard this morning, was editor of the Red and Black when I was initially a student, and who encouraged me to come and work for the newspaper, even though there were students who didn't want me to. One of my best friends and the father of my daughter, Walter Stovall, who was also a journalism student and bravely walked with me through the crowds who didn't want me there. He is now an ancestor, along with Hamilton and so many others. Later, my friend, I didn't know Ivan Allen Jr., but I appreciated what he did for this town. He embraced, as you just saw, freedom and justice for all. And he did indeed transform this city and started it on to the road that is the magnificent Mecca that I hardly recognize when I come to visit here today. And his example is needed so badly every day of these days all over the world. He stands as a symbol for the right thing to do at the right time, which happens to be all the time. Also, finally, my squad. I had a squad before AOC, by the way. Too many to name, but one of whom is Nancy Parrish, a former Ivan Allen Prize recipient, who is here to represent my squad, and he is always by my side, one way or the other. But I also want to go back a little bit farther to someone whose earthly resting place is a few miles from here. Although she, like Hamp, lives forever as an ancestor in the eternal land of the ancestors. You see, we learned in South Africa that you never use a word when someone has gone from our presence. You don't use the word that starts with a D. You say they transitioned, and they transitioned to the land of the ancestors, where they live forever, as Hamilton and all of our friends who have transitioned do. But the one I want to specifically mention right now is our mother. Now, Henry, don't start crying. I am not sure I would be where I am today without her soft-spoken affirmation of the dream I had one day of becoming Brenda Starr. Now, some of you are old enough to know who that was. But that was at a time when a dream of a little black girl in the segregated South to become a Brenda Starr couldn't be realized. I mean, there had been black role models like Ida B. Wells, a crusading journalist to be sure, and I am grateful for the road that she traveled against injustice in this country, but she hadn't yet made the comics. So here was a white, blue-eyed redhead who had traveled the world, and she was my role model. But my mother didn't tell me that that's not a path for little black girls in our world as it is. Instead, my mother, in her sort of quiet, understated way, all she said was, okay, if that's what you want to do. And as I have thought about her response over the years, I've come to realize that my mother instinctively, and maybe it was because of our history, the history we talked about this morning that isn't being taught in most of our schools, but my mother understood, as our community did, our village, which taught us our history, also knew that dreams propel ambition, which is why she said, okay, go on, be Brenda Starr. I also stand on the shoulders of so many more giants, the giants of my village, our teachers and our preachers, for they, like my mother, Althea Brown Hunter, reached back in our history and gave us stories of how our people overcame every attempt to keep them in a place of inferiority. And in other stories, they gave us what I call armor, that is, a first-class sense of ourselves. I mean, the high school I attended here in Atlanta was named for Henry MacDill Turner, and we could not enter through its doors without knowing that trailblazing history. And once inside, we learned from our black teachers about more trailblazers like him, as well as women we will celebrate always, and especially this year, as we mark the 100th year of the suffragette movement, and the insistence of black women who refused to be silenced in their quest for the vote, even as the white suffragettes refused to acknowledge them. The black suffragettes raised their voices for all, for everybody to have equal rights. And so it is that I grew up and was inspired by and armed with my history. I began practicing what they preached and what I learned from Zora Neale Hurston, thank you, Valerie, who wrote the brilliant autobiography. Zora Neale Hurston preached something through her character, Janie, that I identified long before I even knew Valerie, because I read Zora before you introduced her to me. But this is what she wrote about her character, Janie. She said she had been getting ready for her great journey to the horizons and great journey to the world in search of people. And it was important for all the world that she should find them and they should find her. To that end, I started here in Atlanta, finding the young civil rights activists who were going to jail without bail in order to challenge the laws of separate but equal, as I said earlier. My mentor being the Clark College professor, M. Carl Holman, who started the Atlanta Inquirer to report on the students who were demonstrating in ways that they were not being chronicled in other newspapers. And I worked alongside another student, Horace Julian Bond, a student at the time at Morehouse College. And so it was early in my journey to the horizons that I learned to portray people in ways that were not stereotypical, but in ways that were recognizable to themselves as full human beings. It is an approach that would land me a coveted job reporting for the New Yorker as its first Black reporter, and later at the New York Times, where I established the first Harlem Bureau, again, reporting on Black people in all of their manifestations, and not just if they were some, I won't say criminals because there were criminals, but also people who were distinctive and looked for the same things in their lives as everybody else did. Sometimes I was rewarded with a prize for my reporting, and while I can't say I wasn't happy to receive them, my reward was knowing what Valerie referred to earlier, when I went to cover the Black Panthers when they were reestablishing themselves as peaceful people and they started a breakfast program in Harlem. And I went to report on the breakfast program. And this Panther said, well, you can't come in here, you work for the man. I didn't tell him at the time the New York Times was referred to as the Gray Lady, but never mind. So I said, but wait a minute, have you ever read anything I've written? He said, no. And I said, well, how about we make a deal? You let me come in this time, and if what you see in the New York Times tomorrow isn't an accurate reflection of what happened today, don't let me in next time. He thought about it for a minute, and then he said, all right, on one condition. I said, what is the condition? He said that you come in right. Now, I had been trying to do that all of my career up to that point, but those words stuck in my head no matter where I was in the world. I always attempted, as I'm doing at the moment, sir, to come in right. He captured in that rationale what my revered colleague, one of our latest ancestors, Jim Lehrer, and Robert McNeil referred to in describing the philosophy of the NewsHour. And that is that we needed to provide news that could be used to help people make the right decisions about their own lives and those of others near and far. Let me hasten to say that being honored, surprisingly, with this prize comes in a time when we journalists need all of the support we can get to withstand the outrageous attacks on a profession that has never been needed more than it is needed today. We have to have something that enables us to withstand these outrageous attacks. So I plan to do all I can to support my journalist colleagues, partly with this prize, some of it, who I know, however, will not be intimidated into silence. Like the NPR reporter, even in the face of the most horrific attack on her by a top official of this government, did not stay silent. I really kind of thought at that point, initially, that no journalist should have gone on that trip. They should have all stayed home in protest in support of her. But that was just a momentary reaction. For even servants of the people, as you heard this morning from Valerie, even servants of the people have feelings. But we also have to rise above our personal feelings and do the job to produce news that can be used by people. But I was gratified, however, to see the coverage that I hope made a difference to people who care about the news about journalists and the news that they are obliged to do. And while I don't need affirmation, I was pleased to hear Georgia Supreme Court Justice Robert Benham speaking yesterday at the Holmes Hunter lecture when he talked about those in his profession. And you heard a magnificent person speak about the desires and the goals of their profession this morning. But what the justice said yesterday applies equally to journalism. He said, sometimes we have to challenge the things when we know they are wrong. The same was said by Martin Luther King, the time is always right to do what's right. And on that note, I'm getting to the close. I didn't time this, but I'm gonna get there in a minute, okay? But on that note, let me also challenge the use of a phrase that is used to denigrate legitimate news that started in Washington, D.C. I won't say exactly where because I'm supposed to be objective, but you all know where it started. But it is a word and a phrase that has become so popular with demagogues and autocrats all over the world. I am not even going to use that word here because to speak it, even when criticizing it, helps legitimize it. But in case you aren't sure what word I'm referring to, let me just say that it rhymes with cake, but it ain't sweet. And so in closing, let me say once again how honored I am by this award. But with all due respect, and possibly at the risk of having you rescind the award, let me say that I do not see myself as someone who has demonstrated social courage. Rather, I see myself as someone not so much with courage, but with determination. Determination that, among other things, gives us voice to the voiceless and makes us stay focused on our mission in the best of times and in such a time as this. When our profession is being challenged by unchecked social media, which led the esteemed columnist David Brooks to seriously worry aloud the other night on the NewsHour about whether Americans are not persuadable by evidence and facts anymore. Now, challenges to our core values is nothing new. And the history I have studied and the life's journey of the man for whom this prize is named, Ivan Allen Jr., demonstrates that we have overcome those challenges in the past. And it leads me to hold out the hope again that we will come again to victory. I'm reminded, in fact, when we have these challenges, of the words of Madeleine Albright. I was moderating a panel between her and Desmond Tutu once, and he was criticizing the Clinton administration for something they had done internationally that he didn't think was right. And I turned to Madeleine Albright and I said, well, what do you think of that, Madam Secretary? She said, listen, honey, democracy is messy. Get over it. So, not only do I think about what Madeleine Albright had to say, again, we heard this morning that the words that Martin Luther King often reiterated, which is that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So, in case you're not going to rescind the award because I challenged the title, thank you, Ivan Allen Prize Committee, for providing me with another layer of armor to continue to do battle in keeping the values of our democratic project alive and well, and for the people, my colleagues and I, exist to serve as servants of the people. From the very bottom of my heart, let me hurry up before I cry. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I hate to disagree with our honoree, but A, the award is not rescinded, and B, if your life is not courage, I have no idea what courage might be. Thank you for those inspiring remarks, and now I would like to invite Mr. Hamilton Holmes, Jr. to speak also on behalf of his late father.
Good afternoon. I don't think anybody would want to have the challenge to have to come after Charlayne Hunter-Gault and bring remarks to you. Awesome job, as always. So on behalf of my family, let me first say that we are honored to be here to receive the Ivan Allen Jr. Prize for Social Courage. Dr. Hamilton E. Holmes is our father, husband, brother, family member, and good friend. And before I begin my remarks, I'd like to introduce some of our family members that are here joining me. We have a very close family. We spend a lot of time together, and it's certainly important to recognize them as well. First and foremost, my mother, Dr. Holmes' wife, Marilyn Holmes. Allison Holmes Johnson, my sister. My father's brothers, Herbert and Michael Holmes. So, my son and father's grandson, Trey Holmes. Margie Holmes, sister-in-law. Darrell Wilson, nephew. And we have other family members, or I should say they're really friends, but they're almost like family, so I call them family members too, that are here as well. So please raise your hands. And before I go any farther, it wouldn't be right if we didn't recognize Mary Frances Early for being here as well today, too. So, some of you may not know, but she actually was the first African-American graduate of the University of Georgia. So my father and Charlayne were the first two to integrate, but she's the first graduate. And I'm honored to say that later this month, the College of Education is going to be named in her honor. I'd like to thank President Cabrera of Georgia Tech and members of the committee for selecting Charlayne and my father in partnership to receive this prestigious award. Thank you also to the Ivan Allen family and to the Wilbur and Hilda Glenn Foundation for helping to make this happen. February is Black History Month, and we think of the many heroes that contributed to our country's history. Their contributions were numerous. We think of people, obviously, such as Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and Thurgood Marshall. Here in Georgia, many people consider Charlayne and my father as heroes for their contribution to not only our state's history, but our nation's history. My father's recognized for being a trailblazer in Georgia for being one of 2 students to integrate the University of Georgia. Over the years, many people have asked me where my father got his motivation and courage. I believe he was internally motivated by his quest for excellence and his strong desire to become a physician like his grandfather. I believe that he was also motivated by his father as well. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet my grandfather, but he was affectionately called Tup by his friends and family. It's T-U-P, Tup. Unfortunately, he passed away a month before I was born, but I still feel like I know him well. I have heard plenty of stories about him and how that he was strong-willed, a character, and believed in pursuing what was right. Tup had a true passion for golf and was a member of the Black-owned Lincoln Country Club in Southwest Atlanta. Although the course was popular, it was not necessarily known for the quality of the course, and from what I hear, it may have been known for more of the good food they cooked in the kitchen. Today, this land is the Lincoln Cemetery on Simpson Road in Southwest Atlanta. So Tup was one of the best amateur golfers in the area during his life. He played at Tuskegee College, which is now Tuskegee University, and later won 10 amateur championships before dying of cancer in 1967. Again, from what I hear, he was an awesome golfer and was known to drive the ball 300 yards straight down the fairway. I think we'd all like to be able to play like that. So any other fellow golfers in here? I'm sure we'd like to be able to do that as well. By the early 1950s, Tup and several of his counterparts had mastered and grown tired of playing the black courses in Atlanta and surrounding states and devised a plan to integrate Atlanta's public golf courses. They tried to play at the Bobby Jones course, a public course in Atlanta in the early 1950s. Upon their arrival in 1951, they were greeted by the golf pro who told them they were not welcome and would not be allowed to play. Now, those weren't the exact words, but let's just say I cleaned it up a little bit. So if you knew Tup, you knew that he would not take no for an answer, especially when he believed he was right. A legal case was filed which was called Holmes versus the City of Atlanta, and over the next few years, their court case worked its way through the system. One of their main arguments was that our public tax dollars are being used to help maintain these public courses, so why can't we play on the courses in the City of Atlanta? The case worked its way to the Supreme Court of the U.S., and on November 7, 1955, Tup received news that the courts ruled in their favor and they would be allowed to play golf on public courses in the City of Atlanta. This was not only a victory for golf, but a major victory for public accommodations in the City of Atlanta, just as we saw in the video earlier. You would think that they may have gone out and played golf the next day, but they waited for things to calm down a bit, and on Christmas Eve 1955, my grandfather, his brother Oliver, and their friend Charles Bell teed off at the North Fulton Golf Course and played without incident. During the pending court case, Tup and his family were harassed and questioned by both black and white people as to why he wanted to, quote, rock the boat. Many people encouraged Tup to put an end to his foolishness. Well, Tup didn't give up his fight, and his persistence can be summed up by a quote from his younger sister, Alice Holmes Washington, where she says it goes way back to what her parents had always taught them, that we didn't have to take back seats to anybody. Well, Tup, we're glad you didn't. In 1983, the city of Atlanta honored Tup for his accomplishments. Mayor Andrew Young renamed the Adams Park Golf Course in Southwest Atlanta the Alfred Tup Holmes Golf Course. I've had the opportunity to play there several times myself. Tup was also inducted posthumously into the Georgia Golf Hall of Fame in 2012. So my father, Dr. Hamilton Holmes, was born in Atlanta and attended Atlanta Public Schools and graduated from Turner High School in 1959. At that time, Turner High School was one of the most prestigious black high schools in the city of Atlanta. And I will say, I guess I have to also include Booker T. Washington here for my Washington graduates too. So my father was the valedictorian, and Charlayne was third in the class. Obviously, they were both brilliant students. They applied for admission to UGA. My father's a pre-med student, and Charlayne is a journalism student. They were told by the admissions office, however, that they were not smart enough and their family members lacked character. As we know, this was all put forth to keep them from being admitted to the university. In 1959, as we know, UGA was segregated, and the university president, members of the state legislature, and prominent Atlanta businessmen vowed to keep the university segregated. You may not be aware of this, but during segregation, several states in the Deep South would often pay for black students to attend college out of state, primarily in the North and Midwest, in order to prevent integration of the state schools in the South. After being denied admission several times, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of my father and Charlayne. It was called Holmes versus Danner. Danner was the university registrar at that time. And during the 1.5-year court battle, my father attended Morehouse College and Charlayne attended Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. My father and Charlayne had a brilliant legal team. Their fearless leader was Donald Hollowell, who has been recognized as one of the foremost civil rights attorneys of his time. Their all-star team included Constance Baker Motley, who later became the first African-American appointed to the the first African-American female appointed to the federal judiciary. Horace Ward, who later in life became the first African-American to serve as a district judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. And some of you may know that Judge Ward had been denied admission as a law student to UGA in the 1950s. Vernon Jordan was also part of their team. Although he never held political office, he's a well-known and highly respected attorney, civil rights leader, and business consultant. The Holmes versus Danner case also went to the U.S. Supreme Court. They eventually won and were admitted to UGA as students in January 1961. On January 6, 1961, Judge Boodle ruled that the two students were, quote, fully qualified for immediate admission, adding that they, again, quote, would already have been admitted had it not been for their race and color. Robert Pratt, a former professor of history at the University of Georgia, stated, I think Judge Boodle will go down in the annals of Southern and civil rights history as one of a handful of progressive-minded, courageous judges who were willing to make pivotal decisions at very key times in the 1960s. We thank Judge Boodle for his courage at a very difficult time, and his son is here today, as someone mentioned earlier too. Once Charlayne and my father were admitted, things weren't easy for them, as you can imagine. My father lived off campus with the Killian family while attending UGA, but he obviously had to come to campus for classes. While on campus, he had to endure repeated taunts, insults, and people spitting in his direction. He always had to watch over his shoulder because he didn't know what may happen next. While my sister and I were growing up, he didn't share much about his experiences at UGA. My mother recently reminded me that he didn't talk about his experience at UGA for 20 years after he graduated. My father believed that his time as a student there was very bad, to use his words. In the early 1980s, my father agreed to help plan the university's bicentennial celebration and later became the university's first African-American to be named a board of trustees. UGA President Fred Davidson was able to get my father re-engaged with UGA after more than 2 decades of no connection at all. One thing that my father shared with me that impacted me the most, that I'll never forget, is that he told me that while on campus for 2.5 years in Athens, he didn't make one friend. So imagine that, being on campus for 2.5 years and not making one friend at all. Although he endured daily turbulence while he was a student, fortunately there were a few positive things that kept him going. He said that all the teachers treated him fairly, and many commented that they wanted integration, but they were afraid to speak out. He was a brilliant student and was often the curve buster in many of his classes, so that didn't help him make any friends either. The dean of students, who was a feared man on campus back at that time, Dean Tate, looked after him while he was on campus and made sure that he was kept safe. Dean Tate told my father that he may not personally agree with integration, but he would abide by the law and do what was asked of him. They weren't necessarily friends, but formed a relationship where they respected each other. The Tate Student Center at UGA is named after Dean Tate. There were also many African Americans that lived in the Athens community that were friendly with my father. He would often go play basketball with local residents to help pass the time and take his mind off his campus struggles. Through it all, my father graduated and earned his degree in 1963. He graduated cum laude with high honors. He was elected to Phi Beta Kappa and the Phi Kappa Phi honor societies. So he was able to achieve all of this academic excellence despite all of the obstacles that were in his way. My father, if you knew him, was not the kind of man that was looking to be a trailblazer or make history. He simply wanted to attend the best university that could prepare him for a career as a medical doctor, and in the late 1950s and early 1960s, that school was the University of Georgia. My father also became the first black medical student to enroll and graduate from Emory University, as was mentioned earlier. Graduated from Emory University in 1967. He became an orthopedic surgeon, taught at Emory University, was the medical director at Grady Hospital, worked in private practice, and mentored hundreds of young doctors. Unfortunately, he died way too early at the age of 54 in 1995. Although my Georgia Tech friends may not agree, but it is definitely an honor to be a UGA alum. I enrolled as a student at UGA 25 years after my father enrolled, and I graduated in 1990 myself. Although my father never talked much about UGA while I was growing up, once I became interested in attending UGA and eventually became a student there, he really became active with the university. Before he passed away in 1995, I can truly say that he became a full-fledged Bulldog supporter. So those dogs here in the room know that one of his favorite chants was, "Go Dogs, sick 'em, woo, 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 woo." I know there's some UGA fans in here somewhere. So. My father's legacy is secure in Georgia, and his name can be found across the state. At the University of Georgia, there's the Holmes Professorship in the College of Arts and Sciences, and also a lecture series named the Holmes Hunter Lecture Series. At Emory University, there's a Holmes Scholarship for minority medical students. There's Hamilton Holmes Elementary in East Point, Georgia, a street named Hamilton Holmes off of I-20 in southwest Atlanta, at the Holmes MARTA station that was mentioned earlier too. But I think most importantly, the very building where they were denied admission in 1959 is now called the Holmes Hunter Academic Building. It chokes me up a little bit. So again, the very building they were denied is now the Holmes Hunter Academic Building. If you're familiar with the campus, once you go through the arch, it's the first building on the right. The main point I want to get across by sharing these two stories of my grandfather and father is that regardless of any obstacle you face, you can overcome any challenge through perseverance and remaining focused on your ultimate goal. Or as some people would say, keep your eyes on the prize. Stay focused and don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, and that you don't belong. So in closing, I challenge each of you here today as we start the new year in 2020 to make a plan of what you're going to do to make your own history. Please do something special with your life. Make a difference in the life of others, and let's all come together and make the world a better place. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you both for those inspiring remarks. This concludes our program, and as one of our speakers said, let's keep on keeping on. Thank you for being here today.